for it to pop up and make sure we're actually live. I think we are. Okay, fantastic. So you're here for Beard Banter. We're at episode 34. We're back into a cadence. I'm actually feeling good about it. I'm producing content I like. I'm hanging out with people I like. I will apologize to people that have been on the list. I think there's 30 or 40 people that I've not gotten back to. I did go on a hiatus, but I'm getting through it. And one of those is Zach. I think you first sent me a message in July. So to put this in perspective as to how far back I have been putting this off and getting these episodes made, but super happy to have you here. I'm here with Zach Sherf. And the topic we're going to talk about today is Zach and his team and his MSP are going through this adherence to CIS as a method of delivering security, which, if you've ever listened to me for longer than 35 seconds, you'll know I'm a huge advocate of framework-based methodologies and tying to CIS specifically because it's so pragmatic and it applies to everybody. So that said, I am here with Zach Sherf, and we're in this position where you're doing that, right? Like you're going through this world, and I'll tell you why this matters so much for me. I swear to God, I'll let you talk in a second. But this is why this matters to me is that you're seeing a world where as MSPs we're going just like doctors. Doctors in the early days, it was a couple of blokes that had a saw and some leeches, and they could either cut off your leg, put leeches on, some combination of both, and that was pretty much the stuff they could treat. To now actually having this wide body of knowledge and surgical procedures and medical procedures and things that you can do to treat things, there ultimately becomes a guide, and doctors stopped shooting from the hips, and they had the AMA, and they had in every different country some form or format to say, here's what good medical practices are today, and here's what's approved, right? And so you get into that kind of world, right, where you have that change. And where are we now? As MSPs, we have been shooting from the hip. Why did we do Sentinel-1? Because it would sound like a great idea. Why did we put in dark web monitoring? Because someone pitched it to us at a conference.
Yep.
Like, that was the world. And so now, Zach, you guys are shifting to a different way. Tell me who you are. Tell me a little bit about your journey, and then we'll get started on this.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Matt. Again, excited to be here. My name is Zach Sherf. I'm the director of cybersecurity for Interlace.io. We are a people-focused IT provider, and effectively, what we're doing right now is listening to our customers in order to inform what we're doing next, right? And what are our customers saying? They're talking about security.
Yeah.
So, to the CIS standard, you're the
Well,
person.
they're asking about security. Let's clarify
Yes.
that. They're panicking about security, and they're saying, "Hey, you got me covered, Zach. Am I
Yep.
good? Am I protected?" And
Yep.
and you're having to have a different conversation sometimes about that, right? Like,
So that leads directly into the problem that we're trying to solve, right? So clients are asking about security. I think some of them are making the assumption that IT and security and anything with the blinking light all fall under the same umbrella, as that goes, especially I think in the MSP world. But now what we're starting to see is this paradigm shift from people either assuming that security is in place to actively feeling pain around it.
yeah, yeah,
And I think that has been, in the past 2 years especially, the biggest driver of interest and in conversation that we're having with our clients around it, right? So,
and I'm sure insurance hasn't hurt
insurance.
that conversation either, right? At least for
That's a
driving
pain.
that conversation.
Yeah, right? So, insurance is a really huge one. The other thing that we're really seeing, and I think what has really informed our approach and in trying to answer more questions for our customers around cybersecurity is cybersecurity as a method to win business, right? Like
Yeah.
before it was, I think, a liability. It was seen as like an
And almost
operational
maliciously
expense.
so sometimes, accidentally
Mm-hmm.
or otherwise, right? Like, oh, we're going to take care of your cyber, and sometimes committing to things that, as a practitioner, aren't there if you're not doing more than what's on that surface of the sale of a tool, right?
Yep.
Again, in my mind. So, yeah, sorry to segue there, but just wanted to call that out.
No, right? And we're evaluating our own risk and making sure that whatever we're committing to as an MSP is one, inform our customers about what our role is and how they can utilize our tools and our services and external frameworks such as CIS to, build a program. And more than anything is nobody knows where to start, right?
Yeah.
That's what frameworks, I think, to me solve best is they give us the ability to give our clients a really clear journey and something to kind of go after. They give us a first step, right? The risk-based methodology and approach is great, especially if you're looking to mature your program. But risk assessments, formal risk assessments, can be tremendously expensive, and a lot of clients, don't have the luxury. None of us really have the luxury right now of waiting to implement best practices until we go through something like that, right? So they can coincide with each other.
Let me demystify that just a little bit, right? Like if you think about a customer that's in the SMB that has never had a BIA or a business impact analysis,
Yep.
that has never formally written down what software they use, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's the stuff on that beepy boopy thing that I use, right? Like,
Yep.
they've never done those things.
Accounting has the best idea of what software they're using because they're paying.
Only because they're paying. Yeah, only because they're paying, let
Yeah.
alone the shadow IT or the lack of administrative rights restriction that allows the just proliferation of all kinds of crap software. Yep. And so you get into that conversation of like, well, how do we start? And I think it's how do you as an MSP start to grow Control 2, right? Because that's what we're talking about. If we're talking about a control family, let's take away what that even is, right? A control family. And what's up, Jacob Horn and Jeff and Scott and Peter? It's awesome to see y'all, Hector. But if we're looking at a control family, it's like a roadmap. It's a yellow brick road, right? Yep. It says number one.
I love the word roadmap. We'll get into that.
Okay, I'll let you take it away. But I'll say, when you start at Control 1, it says know thyself in the way of what assets are connecting to your machines, or what machines are connecting to your assets and your data assets.
Yep.
Control 2, what's your software?
Yep.
What do you own? And that's that first one. People have never even written that down. Then how are you delivering security? And so that's why I love it being this journey and roadmap. So how are you tackling that when rolling this out to your clients? Is that kind of tied to a roadmap? I mean, what are you guys doing?
It is. So it's all of those points are great. I was looking at the video that you'd reposted, I think earlier today on LinkedIn, in a conversation that you were having around, in a conversation that you were having with, integrating whitelisting into a client onboarding process. And I looked at that and I was like, wow, that's, very similar to what we're doing, except not just whitelisting, but some of the CIS controls, right? We need to, as an MSP, ask questions about what systems we're going to be managing. And we can utilize that process, align it around a standard, and make sure that we get a consistent output across all of our clients. And then a lot of the things that we're already doing as a good MSP have crossover to the MSP controls, and we're looking to find the ways to bridge the gap in and align more with the implementation groups, right?
Yeah. And codifying it, right? Like actually writing it down. And what you're saying basically to your clients is the stuff I already do is already doing some of this. And I want to call that out to MSPs that are talking about going down this path. If you're already doing patching efficiently and you're already doing vulnerability scanning or management efficiently, you've pretty well knocked out Control 7, comma space. Yep. If you have a policy that references it, if you have procedures and processes that reference those policies, and you follow them and you can prove it with artifacts. Right? It's just like if it's not in the PSA, it wasn't done. Yep. This also applies to cybersecurity too, right? So is that a fair statement?
So those are the gaps that we're trying to bridge, right? Of and I'll take us all the way back about how this started, right? 3+ years ago, we were working to address some security concerns for our clients and for the industry as a whole, right? I think a lot of MSPs were seeing security as like this add-on thing. But the clients were viewing it
a new sale,
a new SKU, right?
Yeah.
But the clients were viewing it as like it should be under one umbrella. I'm looking to you for tech. They're so integrated.
Yeah.
And so 3+ years ago at this point, we launched a new platform, a new product called Interlaced Advanced, and we really wanted to simplify it, right? Our whole thing is like you come to us and you get everything included, like in whatever tier that you're in.
Yeah.
So
as many MSPs are, right? Like, exactly.
Yeah. For us, it was adding EDR, adding DNS filtering, adding, things like iron scales.
All right, now stop. Why? Yeah. Why the first time? Why did you add it? What made you add that on each of those tools the first time before the frameworks?
Probably industry chatter. Was the biggest thing is like that point. Was the general to your exactly to your point.
Yeah.
That was the general consensus of security was adding tools. And now we're getting to the point where it's not as much about adding tools as it is making sure somebody is looking at the tools and making sure you wrote down what tools you have and what they're actually doing,
And
right?
what to do when tool goes beep or boop or
Mm-hmm.
bloop, right? Like at the end of the day, there needs to be,
Reacting to the
yeah,
tools.
well, there needs to be, like, everybody talks about security as if it's protection. I want to dispel that for people listening right now and watching.
Mm-hmm.
Security is just a little bit about protection. You have identify, know my stuff, know myself,
Yep.
protect, right? Put up the things, put up the walls, put up the defenses. But it relies on this understanding that the last three of those five are detect the baddie doing baddie things,
Yep.
respond to those baddie things and limit their damage and or blast radius,
Yep.
recover normal business operations and continue generating that sweet profit.
Yep.
Right? Like that's 3/5 after the explosion. So you have to get better at that other side of those things.
And I will say what has gotten much easier with time is that these tools have gotten a lot better as far as remediating a lot of the response and taking away a lot of alert fatigue. Now, don't get me wrong, there's
Right.
been a lot more alert fatigue created, but tools, especially like Sentinel-1, have gotten really good at automatically remediating and letting you know after something is resolved. And then, depending on your own threat tolerance or risk tolerance, really, that's when you go in and do, things like threat hunting and things like that. Going back to kind of where all this started, I talked a little bit about when we created Interlaced Advanced, which brought all those tools in. And now we're looking at this next paradigm shift with the way the industry's moving of pulling in processes and services. I think something that's elusive to a lot of MSPs is the proactive side, right? Like it's something that we've always tried to do. And it's something that is a moving bar. It's something that is a moving bar. And so, talking a little bit about the roadmap that you had said, we wanted to build something that was standards based, and ended up talking to you and figuring out what that standards was, that tracked the things that we're always doing for our client from not just security but general operations perspective, because they're so intertwined, the things that need to happen in a recurring basis, right? Like phishing,
log
attempts.
inspection, those things,
Patches,
patch
like
validation, all of that.
all of that stuff, right? That happens. It doesn't happen 24 hours a day every day, because that would be, kind of, I think, insane for a lot of users to tolerate. But it's things that need to happen, especially if you're writing down that they happen at a certain cadence.
Yeah.
But on top of that, you need to build something. You need to build up, right? It's not enough to have tools that monitor 24/7. It's not enough to have processes that just repeat every quarter ad infinitum. It's about adding more controls, and as a result adding more visibility and security over time, and guiding that entire conversation for the client, because we should be able to go to them and tell them, if you come on with us, we're going to give you a roadmap over the next 1 to 2 years.
Now,
and during that time, we're going to do this 24 hours. We're going to do this every quarter. But on top of that, you're going to start here. And at the end of 2 years, you're going to be 80% done your CIS controls.
Here's a great point. I want to make this, and then I want to jump to a question from Jacob Horton, because this one is a brain tickler, and I love it. So first off is, when you're talking about that, there's also a componentry of these clients have to be part of this team. These clients' executives have to be on board. These clients' executives and internal people need to give us access to those resources to actually make data determination. These executives need to give us the ability to say, sorry, Zach, just because you're the biggest sales guy in the room, you don't get MFA turned off when you're at your home Starbucks. It's not the way we're going to do this, right? Like you see that world playing out. And maybe that leads a little bit into Jacob's question. And it's a brilliant one, y'all. So let's go through it. All right, brain burner time. If compliance is not equal to security, but orgs fixate on the minimum requirements, which is going to be compliance-based, shouldn't we focus on creating more detailed requirements rather than just more open-ended ones? Here's where I would say, in my thoughts, initially answering this, and then we'll go to you on that real quick. I agree, especially as the pool of variables becomes more and more finite. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're looking at Azure GovCloud, and I know Jacob lives very much in this Microsoft, or lives very much in the CMMC CUI and FCI kind of world. But the point being is, if you looked at this as just an open-ended challenge, If everybody went from server 2003, 2008, 8R2, 12, 12R2, 16, 19, 20, 80 force function 2003, 2008, 2008R2, 2012, 2012R2, 2016, 2000. If everybody had all those differences and then different virtualized hypervisors and different network capabilities and different network topologies and different microsegmented, all of those things become unmanageable to try to scale the level of things that have to put into a compliance framework to make it make sense. That's my thought.
Yeah.
That said, if you're living in an Azure AD-centric world, an Azure GovCloud with this Graph API and that setting and these extensible SaaS applications with this SAML configuration and these products that are approved, you can put a lot of requirements that are very specific to that framework that don't get into this infinity pool that you can never, ever reach. So my take on this, Jacob, would be that because technology becomes more and more and more normalized in its usage, capacitance, flows, all of those things, telemetry, over time, you can put more and more compliance standards that are just validating true and pragmatic answers to this 2%, 1% challenge line, right? Like, so yeah, I would also post, Scott says, hey, listen, it's only the starting line. It's fast from the finish line, far from the finish line. And the finish line is always moving. And he's not wrong. But I think as the normalized variables play out, we can script it. We can make it something that's templatable. We can make it something that's scalable. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Jacob's initial question there, or anything?
I would challenge the narrative that it's all orgs who are fixating on compliance, right? So, at least from my perspective, that is traditionally true. And I think a lot of the organizations who've been open to the conversation around implementing compliance and cybersecurity controls are only really regurgitating that because it's coming at like either from a higher level or coming from a client or things like that. For all that it is worth, I think that especially smaller businesses, like a lot of the companies that we're working with, aren't taking a compliance first approach, which is, I think, much better, right? And so one of the reasons that we chose the CIS standard is because it gives us the ability to, again, create that kind of like starting block. The clients who we're working with aren't worried specifically about complying with a specific business or a specific framework, but what they are worried about is winning business, right? And that's the challenge that they're facing. They're losing out on deals. They're losing at the 11th hour when they have to go through a compliance review. And I think now is a better time than ever to say, hey, you might not be large enough to consider going through something like an ISO or a SOC, but if you want to grow someday, you will be. You have to be doing something in between now and then. And I can promise you the ROI on that is going to be winning business.
Yeah.
One of the ways that we're approaching CIS V8 benchmark, and one of the conversations I've been having that's been going really well, is my generation is as such where there's a lot of people who went to community college for 2 years and then moved on to a 4-year university, right, to save money. You go to community college for 2 years, you get your gen eds, you move on to a 4-year university to specialize. Yep. The way I look at the CIS framework is the same way. Let us take you through the community college approach. Let us take you through these controls that do really cross-map over into HIPAA and ISO and SOC. Let us do those gen eds for you and those general policies and procedures. And then when your business grows to the point where SOC, ISO, et cetera, are needed, you're jump-started there. And you already know what cross-reference is over, but you might need to bring in somebody more experienced in that specifically to get you to that level.
Well, and you put it this way, right? Like if I'm in high school and I'm going to be on the football team, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to have a box jump that the coach lovingly calls the shin checker or something, right? Like, and it's going to be a box jump and they're going to measure it and they're going to look at me and go, Matt, you're still a fat lineman. You don't run fast enough. Get in the fat lineman line, right? And I'd be there and I'd be happy there. But the point I make is if I go to college and I'm still doing those same things, they might be called different tests. They might be called different things. But they're going to measure how quick I can jump and how high I can jump. And they're going to measure how quickly I can get off the line and how quick I can cover 40 yards, right? Like that's going to be the thing. And so when you start thinking about CIS, those same controls and principles apply and crosswalk, as you've called it, right, which is accurate, over to another framework that you might need to say. If you're looking at doing your SOC 2, you may be able to reference the processes and policies and procedures you're doing as part of the CIS. So I like to think of it as that muscle flexing framework that really gets you down the path. And if you do CIS right, you'll realize you actually never finish CIS. Yeah. And here's why. If you do your first pass at it and say the way I'm going to gather control one is by listing the number of machines in my RMM, comparing that with the number of machines I bill people for at the client base, and then I'm going to You might move that up to, instead of it being this reactive count-based process, it
Yep.
might now be, I'm going to count any machine that touches your data surface on Azure Active Directory because of single sign-on. I can write down the
Yep.
machine, I can validate it, and that's our new source of truth. That improvement is
The
still the same
flexibility.
control. It's
Yeah.
just being improved upon.
And
Yeah.
the flexibility of the framework specifically makes that so valuable because we can talk to a client who's 30 users and say, hey, we can do this with a spreadsheet and some other systems today. And then as they grow to 50, 60, 100, we can say, hey, it's not tenable to do this, and it's not really meeting the goal or the
And it's
intent of
not
what this control.
reasonable
It's not
anymore.
reasonable,
Right?
right? And it's
Yeah.
not meeting the intent. Like if your intent
Yeah.
is to know what's in the organization, it's not enough to just have a policy that says you do it.
Yeah.
It's enough to put systems into place or seek out tools that assist you in that process. And
And
what's funny is that's true in every other department. And I think we're
yes.
just beginning to make it true for compliance and security.
You're triggering me on that, right? I think the conversation that we go through is, I love it when I'm sitting with an executive and he or she, I'm in a dump truck kind of executive that's doing road work. And I come in and I'm like, listen, I want to explain to you how this is a giant risk and we need to make this upgrade investment. We need to move forward and we need to go back. And he says, I'm not smart enough for all that. I can't understand all that. I said, hey, how many dump trucks do you have? 57. How many of those are in safety level override so that you can hold them in case you need them? 3. Do you guys have a shop? Yep. What's the pressure of a hydraulic line? Well, we try to keep it about 46 psi. You would like, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like you get into this world where there's this almost wall of I'm too stupid as an excuse in that
Yep.
executive space. What I love about a framework is you kind of take away some of the adversarial position. Instead, you're saying we need to work together
Yep.
to do and meet this so that later when your supplier asks you for a SOC 2, right, which don't get me going on a rant about the value of a SOC 2 in reality, but the point is you now have this baby stepper stone. In fact, Sheldon Phillips mapped all of the CIS controls over to the CMMC body of knowledge and 80171 body of knowledge as well, to show that there was not a whole lot missing and quite a bit of kind of little bit of overlap, but for the most point, just absolutely crosswalking. So
Yeah.
brilliant. Start your clients when they don't have this regulatory oversight. Start your clients when they don't have this big body of weight of business loss. So when
Yep.
they're there, they can be ready to beat their competition.
Yep. Now, what's good about where we're at right now, though, and the general, you framed around people saying I'm too stupid, or more of what happens is I don't get that. I get a lot of it doesn't apply to me, or we're too
Sure.
small, or
Sure.
this, that, or the other. And it's, our job to effectively say, kind of two things. One, you're not too small. You're never too small. And the bar has moved, right? The bar is moving. If you're trying to win any business the same size or bigger than you, the industry is moving in such a way where you need to be doing these things. And the other thing is, I think that's kind of a defense mechanism because they don't want to say they're too stupid, and I don't believe that they are,
I
right?
don't
They're
either.
absolutely
But
not.
they don't want to feel put
But it's
down or
daunting.
not know. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
This
yeah.
is daunting, right? If you send anybody the spreadsheet of however, all 18 different control groups, and you go through each one, I tell somebody who's never worked before in this to leverage vetted modules or services for application security components,
Yeah.
they're going to say, what? Like, absolutely not. This is where I think, and this is going to be my shameless plug for partnership and MSP specifically, this is where I think MSPs have the opportunity to regain trust with their clients and effectively say, hey, the framework is there.
Yeah.
And we have a goal and we have a roadmap based on that. But the way that we implement it is very subjective based on the business itself. And we can help
True.
you understand that, all of this comes down to you're already doing this stuff. We just
Yep.
need to codify it and put it into a document and
Yep.
tell you that you've been doing it this whole time and you just didn't
Yeah.
know it.
Yeah. And it really comes into action in Control 3 more than even Control 2. When
Yep.
you start talking about data classification, here, Mr. and Mrs. MSP, here's a bunch of pin on the tail and the donkey pins. Walk over on that board and tell me what data is sensitive. That's really hard to do in a vacuum as an
Yeah.
MSP. You have to have that client on for that journey to say, I will either enable, help, make it to where users can't fail, right? I
Yep.
love seeing like SharePoint libraries that have a mandatory tagging component where
Yep.
you can't create data unless it has a tag that helps you identify classification. But when you start looking at that, that cannot be done by just us on the MSP side.
No, because we don't. Not only can we not, or not only don't we can't understand the intricacies of how that business operates as well as the CEO or the leadership team or
And
the,
I
the
would
staff
wager
there
if we
does.
fast forward, actually, Zach, there's enough commoditization happening in what we do as MSPs day to day
Mm-hmm.
that we will be able to help verticalize and understand some of that nuanced aspect of a business, at least at a vertical level, maybe not specificity to your point of the CEO, but
So it's
uh,
it's funny that you say that because I even had like a something I wanted to talk about, which is the general idea that we're in a race to the bottom on the MSP side of things, right? I think there's a lot of conversation around that right now. It's not something I totally agree with because I think that it just creates opportunities to. It's a race to the bottom if you don't want to change your business model. It's a race to the bottom if
correct.
you don't know adapt, right?
Yeah, if you don't
Um,
find how to add the VCIO in 2014 that says, hey, we're going to offer strategic services because you're not finding much value in what we do now because things just work, right? Like
yeah,
that
yeah,
transition killed a
technology's
lot of
gotten
MSPs.
better. So
Yeah.
how do we? Yeah. So the same thing's happening now with security. That's if we
I love your
look at
term paradigm shift because if you're not familiar with that, like a paradigm shift is something where you are now transformationally seeing something differently,
yeah,
right? And that is something that is fundamentally a change in the way you view something as if in a different paradigm.
yep,
And I know I just self-defined with the word, but I hope I added some color. But the point is that if you keep looking at it the old way, you may never understand what you're looking at until you're looking at it the way that is unencumbered of that sometimes, right? And
yeah.
that's that hard transition. Um,
It's going to be a really difficult thing. To the point around value, I personally believe in this so much that and believe that the way that managed services is integrating is changing so much that you're not going to be able to operate in the way where we just approach clients and tell them you need to do this project, it's going to cost this much money, right? And then tell them to figure out what the ROI is. And I really also don't think that you're going to be able to go to them and say, we've calculated what your ROI is going to be in a lot of ways. Because if you went and started an internal, I mean, we're competing against internal and we're competing against tools. So if you go to an internal, you don't when you're managing that internal IT department, you're not looking at it in the same way you're looking at with an MSP. And I think that's because
yeah.
MSPs just treat all of these individual projects as each one needs to be a sale, each one needs to be convinced. But
Yeah.
if you're actually budgeting for building an IT department, you're budgeting an amount of work to progress it. You're budgeting an amount of work for replacing the servers every 7 years. You're budgeting kind of all of that in. And that's what we're trying to do with security, right? We're trying to say, like, we're not going to sell you on a CIS program. We're not going to sell you on, a maturity, like a 6-month maturity sprint. We're selling you on our services that include a lot of the tools that address CIS controls. But really what they say is if you partner with Airlace for 2 years, at the end of that 2 years, we're including all of the projects and all of the
To get you
partnership
there.
to
Yeah.
get to do each one of those.
We've done that model before as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's get through a few comments real quick because we've got
Mm-hmm.
some good ones. I'm going to let Scott say it here and then I'm going to do a summative comment down the road, but be the Sherpa. And I think that's actually a mantra for 2024, 2023 anyway,
Yeah.
Scott. Like you've been saying it for a while, so maybe there's some licensure credit there. But I'm thinking being a Sherpa guide and drive and help understand and educate. He then gets into answering our question of like, how do you start this topic about, getting people on board with critical assets and jumps over to say, hey, listen, ask them, at least get them to define it, right? Let's start this teamwork process. It looked like you had something to say there, Zach. Go real quick and we'll come back to comments in just a sec.
The be the Sherpa thing, I love
Yeah.
because we're looking at
Oh,
that
yeah.
internally and we're effectively saying, why are so many partners bringing their clients to the beginning of the trail and saying, all right, some other guy will meet you halfway down there,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
You wouldn't do that
No,
if you
you
were
need to
going like
drag
rock
my fat
climbing.
wheezing
Yeah,
butt up
you
the
wouldn't
hill.
do
That's
that
what a
if you
Sherpa
like.
is, right?
And so then you've got this guy, and it's like, oh my
That's
god! I
easy.
look down the trail, and I see a cliff, I see a rickety bridge, I see all of this stuff that I don't know how to traverse. Why are you leaving me at the entrance? Right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's happening where you bring them to the entrance and you hand them off, but then on the tail end of that, you don't know how far they are on the trail. And if you're a true partner to the client, then you should be with them throughout that entire journey, if not the one leading it.
Yeah, 100%. He goes on to say, right, step one is finding the assets. Yes, and getting to understand that cybersecurity is about the data in every form, wherever it may be, however it sits, how it's handled, what happens to it, its confidentiality, its integrity, and its availability, right? Like, yes, start with the assets. Let's identify what the assets are. And more importantly, take that data from an inverse perspective and identify what the assets shouldn't be and
Yeah.
bring light to it. You can cause savings. You can actually help people. That's kind of the whole shtick of SaaS Leo and SaaS Alerts and those players, right, that are focusing on that side of it. So the other piece is, and I'm going to jump back to Shell's comment because he's pulling my chain and I know he's doing it on purpose. But from MSP to VCIO to vCISO to COMIT, right, co-managed IT to co-MSS, managed security services.
Yep.
Yes, Scott, like that's this point is this is always in Delta, and the Delta happens to be reflected upon by, I think, the differences in the pressures and forces of the technology that exists today, and in this shift of things getting simpler, things getting more scalable, things getting more in that way. And the commoditization means that if somebody else is doing that other stuff, like I'm not putting COM ports on, I'm not setting little jumpers to set my IRQ anymore before I put a Sound Blaster card in, right? I'm just plugging in a headphone or a Bluetooth. And so when you look at that simplification, we as MSPs have had to shift to these more strategic roles that will be deeper in understanding how do I help you take that same hockey stick and whoop that other team for this season win, right? And that's the difference we're seeing. So won't get too going on that. Jacob Horn says, what's the over-under on how many years before the MSP space is regulated? Go. You, Zach, first.
In
Real
what
guess.
way? In what way? Right?
I would call it, okay, I'll set the target for this. How many years before the MSP has some degree of a licensure component, irrespective of whether they've dealt with the greater challenge of people working as techs at companies that causes a whole new problem? But
I would reframe this around how many years before MSPs have to are regulated when not working within regulated verticals. Because
yeah, that's
like
fair.
to me,
I'll give you that. That's a freebie.
like you look at Solar Winds, you look
Free
at things
square.
like that. That's
How
happening.
many
quick.
years? Don't opine. How many years? Shoot it.
5 before it's proposed, 10 before it's implemented.
I'm at 7. We're right in the same space. I think what you'll see, though, and there's big announcements coming on CompTIA's Trustmark that's huge for MSPs, 193 controls of beautiful fury. But that said, I think, Jacob, my gut's 7 years. I think we're already talking about it. I've been on a self-regulatory model shtick for years. I'm just a tiny baby fish and not a very big pond. So ultimately, I think we're 5 to 7 years before we ever even hear something like that really happen. But we did see Cercia this year, so I have a little bit of hope. All right, let's not rob Sheldon of his string pull. Sheldon is being salacious here. He is almost akin to insulting these people that have watched the Star Wars episodes in different formats or factors. But Sheldon's argument has been, and I'm not going to let him talk, so he's just going to have to listen to my summation of his terrible argument, is that you have 1 and 2 are almost the mountains you can never climb as an MSP. They are almost the hardest controls to do effectively. 3, even further. 4, in waxing and waning pieces hard in its own right. 5, 6, 10, 11, 9, 12, and 7 as an order is an easier low-hanging fruit to at least satisfy the IG1s of those controls out of order.
Yep.
So, Zach, does it make you want to throw up like it does me? I'm a little OCD, and I really like my ones that who's. But to his point, he feels it's more effective to go with identity and access management, right, and step into some of these other controls in place, like malware and those kind of things.
I'll tell you, in designing the kind of roadmap that I'm building for the client, where we're taking them along the initial journey to get to the goal of IG1 implementation, we're not going in the order of 1, 2, 3, 4. I know. Here's why.
Bo.
Right? Here's why I say that. Because, to the previous conversation about the information that we get during onboarding, we're doing so much during the initial discovery process with the client. We're doing so much during onboarding. And we can always change the configurations and evolve them with time. As long as we're revisiting controls 5, 6, 10, as we get more information from controls 1 and 2 throughout this process.
I'll allow it.
As long as we revisit them and there's processes in place to adapt the configuration, I don't see a reason not to go.
Princess Leia in this configuration is actually not. Yeah, no, I'm with
I
you.
don't
You're
see a
right.
reason not to implement those controls that irrefutably make the client safer, and then just update the configurations of them, update the implementation of them as we learn more through the
Yeah.
ongoing discovery phase.
I love it. All right, back to comments real quick. There's tons of them, so I don't want to leave people out.
Hmm.
Vince Gramillion says, listen, align CIS with major cyber. That's happening. That's happening. That's happening. That's happening. I can't speak about a lot of it, but that's amazingly happening. Very
Yep.
well.
I love
Guns,
that, by the way, because the cyber insurance questionnaires that we're filling out
they're
today,
just
like
getting
helping with our client,
preponderant, like ridiculous is
they're
a great
a
way.
combination of 10 years old and so out of touch with where clients are right now for requirements. It's just, they feel impossible, and they just give people anxiety. So they lie. People lie on them.
Yeah. All right. I want to say this one because I love using this imagery. So you triggered me a little bit, Scott. I know it's hard to do, but bring people to the edge of the cliff, call the fear, and then encourage them to act. Here's what I like to tell on stage sometimes. Okay, so me, Zach, and Scott Minky are standing at the top of a cliff. It's a very windy day. It's gray, and there's about 190 foot of fall into jagged rocks in front of us with no hopes of survival. And if I just reached over and gently pushed Scott Minky off to his death without changing my facial expression, like my wonky eyes just stay the way they are, right? Like, is there any chance Zach doesn't take a step back, take a defensive stance, go, what the hell, man? What happened? What is going on? And protect himself? There's zero chance he doesn't do that. But summarily, as Scott runs down the hill and finds somebody else walking up the hill, does he not take the opportunity to go, hey, don't go up there? Dude pushing people off the hill, right? And is there
Yeah.
any chance they don't believe Zach? I say all that to say, one of the interesting things I love to conjure up is helping MSPs, clients, and partners understand what the ramifications really are. And I've never met a company after a breach or after an incident that was of any massive nature not have a budget, not have willpower, and not have drive. That doesn't always fade. And my
Yeah.
point being is like it's sometimes about just having that experience to share. I know what comes if you don't do this. I'm having to tell you, Matt, if you stay fat and have high blood pressure, you're going to die like this. My doctor quoted a few years ago. But I digress. All right, any thoughts on this one on bringing them, showing them and helping them understand that? I mean, we can't just hack them. That would be great. But
No, I feel that enough of the narrative has shifted to the importance of cybersecurity outside of fear of being like hacked, that it's not the best way to approach the conversation, right?
yeah,
If you combine fear with fear, you're just going to get a whole lot of inaction, right?
yeah,
And so I think one of the things, like, to tie the whole conversation together, I'm not looking to bring the client to the edge of a cliff and say, hey, if you don't, put on a harness, you're going to fall straight down there. I think a better approach to that is saying, like, the company that you want to be is at the top of this cliff. So how do you get the harness? How do you get these different
yeah,
things
totally.
to climb up? How do you get the training that you
Yeah,
need to
it's all
climb
about
up
the
to the top?
paradigm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. So
yeah,
just changing the way companies think. And I think CIS does that, right?
it
CIS is
does.
the rock climbing 101
I mean,
versus the
as long as you
previous
go five,
mechanism, which is
six.
like, if you don't give me $5,000, I'm going to push you off the cliff, right? And
Yeah,
that's just
yeah.
not.
Well, no, there was no monetary aspect. I just wanted to shove him off the cliff, if I'm honest. I wanted to put this in perspective. There was no threat,
Yeah.
no ITs. But I think you made a good point of changing the narrative, right? And what you're talking about. And you could almost bring this to the same thing. Why were you standing on that cliff? It's because me and my wife were about to build the best balcony right here for this house we're building back here.
Yeah.
And we need to know how to make it secure. And we want to make sure, like, it is about that. You want to be up there. You just want to make sure you're safe and protected and you have the ability to defend yourself and not fall off if Matt shoves. You can grab the railing, right? Like you
Yeah.
can have a little wire there or something. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
it's to the paradigm thing. It's reducing risk to win business as opposed to reducing risk to not die, right? Like, that narrative only works so much. But I think a lot of business owners would align more with winning business than they would trying to avoid death. They think about
yeah.
one more. They think about one more than the other. I'm sure of that.
Well, I think Carrie Simpson is the one that says people usually have one of two motivators in life, right? And they feel very different. And I think you've just kind of codified that delineation, right? Fear is a motivator. It just doesn't end with positive results. You don't feel great after fear.
Yeah.
You
No.
feel fantastic after motivation, success, and winning,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's kind of the point there. But yeah, so you're not going the order of 1, 2, Zach. You've been quoted by Jacob Horn, a
That's
famous
fine.
person in the industry around CMMC and 80171. Yes, police. Yes, that's the man right there. Thanks, buddy.
I
Thanks,
stand by
brother.
this approach because I think it just makes sense. Get more controls in during the onboarding, get more controls in while the clients are thinking about it, and then go through some of the harder aspects of it. And don't let the hard aspects prevent you from doing what needs to be done and what's going to make an impactful difference to the client in the meantime. Just understanding that you may have to go back with the information that you get and update it. But that's just a core understanding of information security as a whole, but especially CIS.
Yeah, 100%. And I think to your point and to Scott's point, it's not about helping them over or driving them to the fear. It's about helping them overcome their fear. Why do I wear a harness? Well, it's because if in some way I was to slip or lose my hand, I want my body to fall upon a substantive enough hold that I do not fall to my death.
Yeah.
But I want the experience of not having that harness be what holds me. Right. And so you get into this world of it's focusing on that positive of being the top of your cliff as a company and driving business and being successful and feeding your employees and
And for some people, the
winning.
harness just gives you confidence. Even if
It
it's something you
does.
never have to use, knowing that it's there can be enough to get you to take a leap.
I'll tell myself right now. I bought a KTM Enduro 690R, which is very tall. It's like a 37-inch saddle height. Well, you ever met me? I don't have a 37-inch inseam. So I thought about digging a ditch in the garage and I thought about digging a ditch in the backyard. But when I was up on it, my confidence is low because I can't touch. I have to rely on that. I have these, but I'm going to be honest. I'm lowering it. I'm putting in a lowering link to drop it a half inch so that I can at least get a little more foot pad.
Yep.
And psychologically or otherwise, I'll feel better about the bike and I'll be more confident and I'll make better decisions. And it does come into sometimes having the harness and having those things, belt, braces, to Scott's point in these comments. It gives you the ability to make decisions you wouldn't make if the risk was so chasmic and no hope of survival. But if you are now in a position of all these safeties, you might reach a little further for that next stone. You might climb a little higher in that company. And I know we're making cheesy correlations, but definitely it's a pool pond. Pond's good for you, Matt. I agree. Touche. Yeah, pond-esque, you might say. Maybe even small bathing pond. But how's the journey been going? How are customers as you're starting to deliver this? And you said, hey, you're going to talk about how you're delivering it.
Yeah.
How's this going for you?
So it's new. It's an entirely new platform. And if you remember last year when we started on this journey, I'd built something completely bespoke and custom, like a custom questionnaire for us to go out and understand what our clients were looking for. And
Right.
that's where a lot of this information came from around how customers were feeling. A big part of that questionnaire was trying to gauge as much as they were feeling as opposed to where they actually were and kind of sat, right?
Yeah, man.
And so we used that combined with a handful of other things to inform what this process would look like. It's
God, I love
launching
you.
literally right now. It's launching
Oh,
right. So I will. This is not bait, but you're gonna have to have me on again after
okay.
this to talk about
Bait or otherwise,
how it
I'm
went.
in.
Yeah, how it's going and how it went. But we just want to make sure that we're approaching it methodically, and that for every control and things like that, that there's the kind of proper things in place.
So most people don't know this, but when I left my former entity that I was at, one of the key things that was on my mind was making sure my non-compete and healthy kind of restrictions on those golden handcuffs didn't stop me from teaching other MSPs, being an adjunct helper, right? And it did initially. It said, listen, you can't work for another MSP. It's part of you getting these beautiful dollars as you exit, right? And so I negotiated for that very hard. And the reason for that is exactly this story, Zach. You and I chatted a year ago. I'm able at a company at PAX 8 where I get to meet with Zachs of the world 5-6 times a week and give my thoughts, my experience, my failures,
Yep.
guidance and take it for what it's worth. And, it lets me stay connected to what I really love doing, right? Which is protecting end consumers. So I'm happy to be part of your journey, man. It's been awesome.
Yeah, it rules. Are we? How much time do we have?
We have 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
I shut her down in 1 minute and 54-ish seconds. Give or take.
Okay. I want to ask you this question
Okay, let's do
before
it.
we hop
Rapid
off.
fire.
A lot of people ask me, and it triggers my imposter syndrome more than anything,
I
how
know
to
where you're
get
going.
into cybersecurity. How
Right.
do we start? Where do I start? And what do you say?
It triggers me, man, because I don't put myself on a pedestal. I don't feel like I have anything solved. I feel like we're all in this renaissance of growth where if I was ever to say, I've got you, I know the answer, I'd be wrong. What I love to say is I'll share my experience. I'll
Yep.
share what I've been through. I'll share what I've seen. I'll share what I've actually experienced and I think will help you. But I think even this thought of getting into cyber, hell, if you locked your front door this morning, you've at least done something to protect an asset today.
Yeah.
Huzzah. Right? Like, and I think there's this concept of what you're talking about is this imposter syndrome aspect. And I definitely live it. I do. When people ask me how do you get started in cyber, sometimes I cringe a little of like, who am I to give this advice? Who am I? And here's what I'll say. Because we're in a renaissance, if you've got a paintbrush in your hand, you definitely have the ability to start continuing to drive and grow your knowledge and grow others' knowledge and share
Yep.
your experience, right?
Yep.
So yeah, it's makes me feel quite uncomfortable, but I do have those meetings quite a bit, and I enjoy doing it afterwards. I just don't like some of it. So yeah,
I totally get it. And I feel very much the same way. I won't get super into it because I know we're right at the time, but it's more or less the same thing. It's I feel like if it interests you and you do it, you kind of go from there, right?
yeah,
And it's you made an analogy at the very beginning of like if you get thrown into a boxing ring with three other boxers and you're not a boxer, you become a boxer real quickly, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you learn to be a boxer, it
Yeah.
seems, or at least you get punched in the face a lot and have eyes like this, right?
Yeah,
So
but at the end of the day, you
uh,
might learn you love boxing.
yeah, you might. Thank you for being here, brother. It's been freaking awesome. I will have you back. I want to hear more about your journey. I want to hear about your punches in the face.
Yeah.
That's what people want to hear. And so be prepared to share that. Thank you all for being here, and I'll see you next week. Next week, I don't think I have a guest locked in, but the following week, I got a pretty awesome one coming up from Security Studios. So, all right, y'all. See you later.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank
See
you.
you.